A message to the audience. This episode is an audio-only episode as the detective is still currently active and asks that no video be shown. There are also parts of the audio that were muted at the request of the detective. Finally, for those that listen to episode 36, you will hear a specific connection to the content of sexual assault and how officers and detectives sometimes look at these cases before gathering the evidence or attending training about emotional trauma and victims as it pertains to sexual assault. This is Reasons We Serve, a channel dedicated to the women and men in law enforcement. Episode 37, Idaho State Police Detective Vickie Gooch. Vickie began her law enforcement career in 1980 and worked for several different law enforcement agencies. Like many new officers, Vickie worked on patrol, handling calls ranging from traffic stops, vehicle accidents where passengers and drivers died, to burglary and domestic violence calls. In 1988, Vickie began working for what is now the Idaho State Police as a detective in the narcotics unit before finding her true calling, working major cases such as child sexual assault, rape, murder, fraud, internal investigations, officer-involved critical incidents, to name just a few. Vickie retired in 2023 but was recently rehired by ISP, where she currently works cold cases using genealogy and DNA to catch suspects that have thus far gone unpunished. This is her story. Okay, can you introduce yourself for me, please?
So my name is Vickie Gooch. I'm a detective with the Idaho State Police, assigned to headquarters. My primary assignment is working on OPSs, which are IAs, conflict cases, and then cold cases.
Okay. And Vickie, can you give me a little bit of background about growing up, what your family life was like, where you grew up, stuff like that?
So my grandparents are Greek immigrants that ended up in Idaho. So I have parents, both sets, born and raised here. But I have a twin. In the early 60s, my dad was in the Army as an officer stationed in Greece, and my twin sister and I have a unique background. We were born on actually Greek soil in the Athens, where my family comes from, so we hold dual citizenship. So the first formative years was spent in Europe, in Greece specifically, and then my dad went to Chicago, and we were in Chicago for a period of time while he worked Army intelligence, and then he retired and took a federal government job in the Bay Area, San Francisco, and we moved out there in the 60s. And my formative years were spent in the Bay Area.
Can you describe a little bit about how your parents were, how they raised you?
So my dad was very strict. He was an Army officer, was in World War II in the Korean conflict, and would have gone to Vietnam. But my mom had didn't really want him going to Vietnam. He'd spent enough time away from home, 28 years. And I have a twin, like I told you, that we were young kids, but we had teenage siblings. And she said, basically, you've already served your country 28 years. I would rather you come home and start in basically coming home every night from work. So this is what happens. In the 60s, he decides to retire, but he takes a government job, a top secret clearance job. She didn't like that he was gone all the time. We moved to the Bay Area, and his top secret clearance job took him away from the house 3 weeks out of every month. So I was raised by my mom, and my dad would come home. He was the provider, but he was a father figure provider, and then he was gone, right? So my mom was a stay-at-home mom, and we were fortunate. We had a very caring mom.
Would it be fair to say that you grew up in the Bay Area then?
Yes, that's what formative years up until the time we were 12. And then we moved to Boise, Idaho in 1974. And to be quite frank, we were kind of in culture shock. There was one color and one religion, and we were the color, but not the religion. It was a setback because they never gave us this understanding, and there was no internet or Google device to know where you were going. You just knew we were going to Idaho.
What specifically?
He took a job here. My dad took another job, a government job here. At the time, it was called Ada Council of Government, which is now our county commissioners.
Okay.
The only thing I was thankful for, because we all have a sense of humor, was that it wasn't Pocatello. So we were willing to come here for the mere fact we weren't moving to Pocatello. But it was an adjustment. It took a long time because we're in our teen years and we liked where we were and we didn't necessarily like where we had come. So it took a while to make that adjustment. And then if you think about it, you weren't here because you came from somewhere else as well. Boise was 55,000 people, but Meridian was 3,000. And it was dairy farming community. We had never grown up in that. We grew up in a city, suburb of a city. So it was an adjustment.
Interesting. When you're in, obviously, parents are from Greece, moved to the Bay Area. Dad was in the military. Would you consider your parents conservative, liberal? How was that growing up in the Bay Area at the time?
They're very conservative. This is what moved us to Idaho. My dad's boss was Sharon Tate's father. He had been a colonel in the Army, and he was running the unit my dad worked for, both in retirement. And when Sharon Tate got murdered, and then I'm certain this is a joke in the family that my dad saw some kid smoking a doobie on the street corner where we lived. He said, California's gone to hell and we're moving. So I think really what the impetus for my dad was the Sharon Tate connection. My siblings had graduated high school from the Bay Area, and he had my twin and I were the younger siblings of the five of us. I think his concern was the direction California was going. I joke now because if he was alive still, he'd be over 100, what he would think of California today. So I think that really was what caused him to make a reevaluation because his job wasn't going anywhere. He was actually working during the Cold War, inspecting missile silos in many locations throughout the United States in anticipation that Russia might be a threat, China might be a threat. He was doing that kind of job. I don't know that he was losing his job. I think what he was seeing, the direction California was going in the 70s, because of his conservative nature, concerned him about raising the last of his two children in that environment.
So you had a twin sister, but did you have three other siblings?
Yeah, they were older.
Brother, sisters?
Two brothers and a sister.
Okay. What kind of student were you growing up?
I was a good student, but I had a very strict dad. So you didn't screw up. None of us ended up in prison. None of us ended up having children out of wedlock. My dad could hear what you thought. So we all towed a line. And we thought it was a harsh upbringing, but in reality, it was probably a good upbringing, right? But we thought he was really too strict. And I'm thinking after seeing the things we've seen in our line of work, that's the upbringing I think that kept us all. We're still connected. We still have a close family relationship, absent the fact my parents are gone. But I thought when we're growing up, we're thinking, you're way too strict. There's a set standard and you maintained that standard.
Sports? How about sports?
Yes.
You're athletic?
Yes.
What were you into?
All of us. So track and field, cross country, field hockey. Soccer wasn't here yet. Soccer was in California, but not here yet. Those types of sports. So a lot of the things that presented here when we came here in the 70s, they were trying to make it equal. So we had field hockey instead of soccer. So I played field hockey all 3 years. Did track and field, ran cross country.
Was there a specialty that you...
I liked the track and field.
Yeah.
I really did. As an adult, I liked the soccer. The adult leagues came here eventually in the 80s. And so when I started policing, I needed an outdoor hobby activity, and we had soccer. Adult soccer leagues finally made their way into the valley.
Huh. Okay. We talked a little bit about this before we began the recording, but was there anything that drew you to law enforcement, and what age was that?
So I know that you told me you've interviewed other people that have told stories, right, about what there are some that had no interest in being cops, and it just was an accident. I knew probably in second grade in Petaluma, where I grew up, that I wanted to be a cop, and that's because I saw somebody. I don't know what the activity was. It's in the Bay Area. It's a suburb of San Francisco. A police officer came to our school, and I don't know what he was doing. I wasn't connected to the purpose he was there for. But I thought, boy, I like that he brings a semblance of order. Also, I was raised by an Army officer, so I saw that uniform every day. But I also felt this calming or peaceful feeling associated with it. And I thought, this is something I would consider doing in second grade. And I never outgrew that. And that's as odd as it is.
Yeah, that's so young.
I just knew that's the direction that I was going to go. It could have been a fireman that came that day. For whatever reason, the time and place and that interaction was enough to set the course of my career. It could have been a fireman. It could have been a veterinarian. It could have been a drug dealer. Who knows? Do you know what I mean? You just have to think at the time it presented, it influenced me enough to make a decision about the career and the direction I was going.
But do you think that had something to do with your dad being in the military and kind of like what you said, a kind of a semblance of order?
Yes, but you have to think this is in 1972, 73. I never saw a female officer, not even in California, right? Now, did we see officers? Yeah, but most of them were males, right?
Yeah.
I never had a reference point. None of my family was law enforcement until I entered in, and now I've had many people follow me in my footsteps. But I don't know that it was that. It could be the discipline. So I was raised in a very strict, disciplined environment. There's discipline associated with that. And then there was some calming effect. So whatever he was attending to, I saw that he calmed it, and that's what I wanted to do. And I also felt protection. There was some protection and service going on there. And I know not everybody enters this line of work for that reason, but that is exactly why I came here, to protect and serve, and I'm very victim oriented.
Okay. Okay. Interesting. All right. So how does your career begin in Idaho? Where do you start? I know we're gonna kind of gloss over a little bit, but you've been with many different agencies, but where do you start?
So in the marshal's office. So here in Ada County, in the early 80s, you could actually go to work at the marshal's office and work your way into a commission position. So I went at 17. We couldn't be commissioned yet. At 17 to the Ada County marshal's office, basically filing things, being a secretary. We called them secretaries and not office managers or these other terms. And with the goal of that they would help me establish the foundation of police. And so I knew I wanted to be a police officer on the street. So at the time in 1982, had an affirmative action hiring. So they announced that they were looking for women. They didn't say minorities. So I've been in several phases of hiring in the 80s. Some agencies were looking for women, some women and minorities on this affirmative action train. So I put my application in. And initially I didn't get picked. And I went back and tried again. And the second go round in 82, I got selected. And I was only one of two women working for the agency at the time. And the other women had been there 2 years. So once I saw an opportunity, I applied. The opportunity that was specifically directed at my gender, I applied to try to get entrance into what I perceived at the time was a profession that would have been difficult otherwise to get into.
And so you said the marshal's office, is that like the police department that
they used to get, so they're still the marshal's office, but now they're just courthouse security, where what happened was in the early 80s, the marshal's office for Ada County was serving all the warrants, arrest warrants, all the summonses, subpoenas, anything that came out of the court. The marshal's office was mandated to serve those upon the people, including arrest warrants. Well, then the sheriff's office somewhere along the way took over that responsibility. So the marshal's office today is a courthouse security organization, not what it was when I started. So most of the people I worked with were trying to train me in anticipation I wanted to be a police officer. They were retired law enforcement, most of them out of California, that came here in the 70s to retire and went to work for the marshal's office as commissioned officers for the marshal's office, serving paperwork for the courts, so including arrest warrants.
Would that be considered your first law enforcement job was with the marshals?
But I'm not really qualified. I'm 17. You have to be 19. In Idaho at the time, you had to be 19 to be commissioned.
Got it.
So it would have been my first real policing job, my first commission job, because you could be 19 in Idaho and go through post and get your commission.
So you were 19 when you went through?
I have a picture, actually. I don't have it on me. I have a picture of me on the threshold. So I got hired at 19 and put my first uniform on my 20th birthday, and I have a picture of that.
Wow. So how was that? 20 years old, starting off in law enforcement. I mean, give me your thoughts about how that was starting out. I mean, super excited, nervous.
No, excited, because I thought it, unbeknownst to me, what the environment was going to be like. I thought it was like I'm at the gates of Disneyland. Well, for me, it'd be the gates of the body farm, because I went to the body farm one time, and I don't mind doing death investigation because half of the equation is in front of you already solved. Somebody's dead. I went to the body farm and I'm like, oh my God, this is like Jurassic Park. We're about to experience something nobody else gets to. So that's how I felt, was I'm going to have an experience that's going to be so positive and enlightening that I'm never going to have any negative feelings associated with it. But that's not what happened. So I'm an optimist. I never focus on the negative of what happened in my career, because there were some negative things, very significantly negative things. I don't let them define me. The first, I will tell you, because I thought about you talking to me today, the woman that was already hired on the agency, I just observed. I was told by my dad, just keep your mouth shut and observe. And so I took that to heed. That is probably what I should do. So I go into what would have been the morning briefing. I'm wearing my uniform. I'm brand new. And the other female who's already working there comes in, sits down, and somebody greets her. Good morning. And her name was Pam. And she said, fuck you and the horse you rode in on. And I was like, not that I don't swear, okay? I was like, if I ever, this is a self-reflection, if I ever get to that point in my career, I will never remain. So it was very negative what I felt. So I asked one of the other officers, can I ask how long she's been here? Because I didn't know her. They go 2 years. And I was thinking, wow, that's a 2-year career. I will never allow myself to view our profession in that light. I don't know what was going on that day. I don't know the dynamics between Pam and this other officer. Nothing. Don't know the history at all. But I knew that set a tone for me that I wasn't going to be that person. I felt it was very negative. And I think that it wasn't Pam. I think Pam, it was a byproduct of Pam and the environment in which she had been working for 2 years. I don't think this is Pam. Because later on, I found out Pam's parents were my teachers in junior high. This isn't the Pam that I know her parents raised. Pam was a byproduct of the environment in which she was working.
You mentioned something just now where you said your dad kind of gave you advice, just be quiet and just kind of listen to what's going on. What were your parents' thoughts about you becoming going into law enforcement?
I didn't have a problem. So my mom was very supportive of education. My mom wasn't college educated. She was born in 1927. She basically fulfilled the role that her destiny was, to be a stay-at-home mom and raise kids. She said, don't ever stop educating yourself because knowledge is one thing that can't be taken. My dad didn't have a problem with the profession, but he wanted me to do it at the federal level.
Okay. Before we began, again, a little questioning that was going on. You had talked about a story about your dad. You had a full ride to Berkeley. Can you kind of explain that?
So I forget about that. Yeah, so I actually had a full ride scholarship to Berkeley, to go to Berkeley in 1980, a track scholarship and an academic scholarship. And I wanted to go to Berkeley. I'd grown up in the area. I was familiar with it. I wanted to study pre-law and then go on to Hastings School of Law and be prosecutor. Well, my dad, because in 1980, and remember the reference to Sharon Tate, my dad had some concerns about Berkeley because the American hostages had been taken in Iran, and I had an older sister that stayed in the Bay Area, and she was sending news articles, because we didn't have the internet, home in letters she was writing, showing the Iranian students' dorm rooms being basically firebombed over the protest that we had taken 52 American hostages. They had taken 52 American hostages in Iran. So my dad was getting those articles from my sister, and he told me, in essence, I'm not going to let you go to Berkeley. Now, at the time, my twin and I were 17 and had graduated high school, and we were still 6 months from turning 18. I had no mode of transportation to get me to Berkeley, no means to get me to Berkeley, and basically acquiesced to his demand that I wasn't going to Berkeley and I needed to find an alternative. So I'm glad you brought that up, because that really was a defining moment for me, because then at that point I realized I'm never going to let anyone make a decision about my future without my input. And it wasn't, and I'm not just saying a man, I'm saying a woman too. If it wasn't going to be something that I could foresee myself wanting to do or having the ability to do, I wasn't going to allow anyone to run interference with it again. Because that was my goal. Berkeley was my goal. I'd spent 4 hard years sacrificing a social life, going to school, doing my athletics, and being a good student to get that scholarship. And it wasn't an easy scholarship to get. And then in a moment's notice, somebody else makes the decision that I'm not going to fulfill what I felt what should have been my destiny.
Okay. So getting back to, you start when you're basically 20. Are you on patrol at that point?
So you're in their officer candidate program.
Okay.
So you start at the airport. This is old school. You start at the airport and then you work your way out to a patrol vehicle. The patrol vehicle is patrolling the airport and then eventually down to the campus. You're not FTOing yet. Eventually you're FTOing, but you are put in a patrol car in a confined area, the airport and the campus, and you're being trained. We didn't go to post at that time, like they're doing today. You did your post credits in-house, in the agency. So we had block training every Tuesday and Thursday for 4 hours. You were learning the police tactics, and then you were going out and patrolling, and eventually you worked your way to field training.
When you get to field training and you start doing actual patrol, is there any sense at your age, any trepidation? Are you excited? What's going on when you finally get to do that patrol work?
I have to say, I can't say that. I won't say that. The optimism I had the day I put the uniform on changed when I got to work with people that weren't necessarily receptive to the affirmative action hiring. So I wasn't received well, and I wasn't received warmly, with the exception of a few.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the problem is, at the time, in reflection, they didn't know what to make of the fact that we were being basically forced into that environment, forced into that employment, because affirmative action, in essence, says you will have a representation of women in your agency based on the number of men, right? So something was being imposed upon a group of people that didn't have the buy-in to that. So I won't say it was warm and fuzzy. My optimism immediately was replaced by the reality that I was forced into by the hiring process itself into an environment that the people that were receiving me weren't ready for me.
And that was early 80s?
82.
Okay.
But I don't think I was alone. I think looking back, reflecting upon Pam's first comment that I ever heard her speak, she had already been experiencing that for 2 years.
Yeah.
And she was at a point of frustration, and I didn't realize that. I thought she allowed it, but she allowed for it to get to her. I did not.
So notwithstanding those thoughts of people not really feeling warm and fuzzy about you, being on patrol itself, though, what were your thoughts? Were you nervous? Did you worry about your own, well-being? I mean, because I've never been on patrol, so I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know that I wasn't worried because I felt like the training was adequate for us to hold our own. Mm-hmm. So I thought, and I did have physical altercations those 2 years, multiple physical altercations by people that didn't want to be arrested. Well, number one, because they didn't want to be arrested, but number two, because they didn't want a woman arresting them. I did have people express that.
Really?
Arrestees.
Interesting.
Because they weren't used to seeing females. But I can't say that I ever, like today at 60, I might be concerned that I might break something now and it'd take longer to heal. Mm-hmm. But in my 20s, we were ready to run and gun. I'm going to give you an analogy. So I was going to college while I was doing this. So I was getting LEAP funds, Law Enforcement Assistance Program. I was getting paid to go to college and be a cop. So were 99 other people in our program. And all of us wanted to run and gun, maybe with the exception of one person, and we don't know what they wanted to do. I don't think they had figured it out, right? So we all knew that this could be an environment that was physical, right, and potentially deadly, but none of us allowed that as a deterrent to what we wanted to do. Policing was fun. In the 80s and 90s, policing was fun. We used to say, I won't say we're saying it today, but we used to say, I can't believe we're making this type of money for the fun we're having when we come to work. And I've had 9 different types of jobs, and I've said that about each and every one of them. And then it has changed. I won't say that it's changed for the better. It's much more difficult to police today. But it used to be fun to police. I never thought, I may not go home one night. I never let that influence me going to work because I think that would basically be a hindrance, right? I never thought, today I may go and not come back. Did I know people that got killed on the line of duty? Later on in my career, I did. But early on, I did not. And I worked with some really good officers that this is what happens in your career. Some administrations, if you're really proactive, want to temper you. And so sometimes you get disciplined for their proactivity. And I worked with officers that were wonderful officers that are retired from that were under constant scrutiny because they were policing as policing should have been policed. And they were getting in trouble for that. The funny part is when you start to be scrutinized in a negative and you thought you're doing the right thing, you end up in the group of people like-minded who are in a like circumstance. So I won't call it the leper colony because that's not fair, but a lot of people who have spent time in this career know exactly what I'm talking about. You think you're doing the right thing because you are, and you're being scrutinized by an administration that doesn't understand what you're doing or why you're doing it the way you are.
Yeah.
So, and then compounded by the fact I was a female. So I have to laugh. There were 6 other officers. They know who they are if they listen to this. At the time that were very encouraging of me, don't let how you're being treated let you down. You have it in you. Just go forth. It was hard because the barriers, and I'm not talking the physical barriers, but the mental barriers of people not being receptive to me being there made it difficult over time. And eventually, after 2 years, we had an agreement to part our ways.
Okay, before we talk about that, circling back to arresting these guys.
Some were girls. Some were girls.
But the people that didn't want to be arrested by a female per se, right? Was there ever a situation, because I think women have better verbal skills, was there ever a situation because you were kind of an anomaly on the street where you felt like people were maybe a little bit more compliant with you because you were a female, or no, they didn't care, they didn't want to get arrested by a female?
No, that's a good point though. There was one arrestee I had. He had 7 felonies and I got him on all 7 and some were warrants. And when I took him to jail, officers were coming in because they had to have, previously, when they arrested him, he fought them. And some of them came in and showed me their scars from the fight. And so I asked him while I was booking him, may I ask you? And he said, my mom raised me right not to hit a woman. 7 felony charges. And I had officers coming in off the street after they heard who was under arrest as I was transporting them. And they wanted to tell me their story. That their story was every time they arrested him, he fought them, and some of them had scars from it. So I will tell you, there are some people that were raised right. I come from a generation. They recognized his mother told him, don't ever hit a woman. He saw when I went to arrest him, I was a female, and he basically submitted. So there was some benefit to that. Most of them were drunk, and they weren't wanting to go to jail. It didn't matter that I was a female. They were drunk and not wanting to go to jail, and it was compounded by the fact I was a female.
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about the gun retention story we discussed before that you had
learned? So that came years later, though. So I will tell you, I have to give Rich Furman, who's a retired BPD officer, all this credit. I just ran into his nephew on a case I was working. I said, make certain you tell your uncle. He never got to hear this story. But I had been going through, BPD did a lot of quality training, right? And then I go to post for 6 weeks, and all it is just bombarding you with everything you need to know, and then try to go forth and conquer with this skill set. And I had a guy laced on PCP in the late 80s when I was working for a smaller agency in Idaho, who I thought was a drunk until I got to him and realized that he had something else on board, completely not alcohol related. And he got out of the car and ran to the back of my patrol car. And at the agency I worked for, Weezer, you didn't have backup. You were the only officer on duty. And he got on my radio and started yelling to dispatch. He could engage the phone or the mic to say, this is bullshit. She doesn't need to be arresting me. And so dispatch hears this foreign voice going over the air, and they know it's gone to hell, right? So we don't have anyone that you can call that comes in. They have to be called from home. So I make the mistake, which we had PR-24s. So my PR-24 was locked in my door, and he was on my mic in my car. So I pried his fingers off the radio, and he took my gun out of my brake front holster.
Just for clarification for the audience, what's a PR-24?
It's a baton.
Okay, a baton.
So did you know what a PR-24 was?
I knew what it was, yes, but I just wanted
to... It's a baton. So we were trained well on these batons. Yeah. My first baton was actually a straight stick. In the 80s, you're using straight sticks. By the late 80s, we went to PR-24. So there's a little more torque with this baton.
Okay,
so it's locked into my car. I'm not able to get to it. So I pry his hands off my radio, and he realizes the fight's going to be on, so he grabs my gun. Well, we have revolvers with brake front holsters. Mm. He gets the gun out, and the handgun retention technique that Rich Furman had just taught me, I had just graduated from the academy 30 days before, was very effective, not once but twice, because this individual got my gun twice out of my holster. At no time did I feel like I could shoot him, as odd as this sounds, because at one point or 2 points I was staring down the barrel of my gun. The fight was back on, and 11 minutes later, as the suspect's running away, my backup arrives, and he's able to bag and tag him. Well, the same suspect. So then I'm left there to secure the scene. This suspect on the way to the jail, we didn't take him to the hospital. We both were battered. He kicks the window out of the back seat of the patrol car where he's being transported, and handcuffs, launches himself out the window onto, because he's under a PCP, we found out later, we tested him, onto the asphalt. I get called, come down to the SO, we got to drag him into the jail cell, and we take him in 1986. And he looks like ground beef on his face because he has no hands to prevent the impact of that launching, and the jail takes him. So then the next day he files a police brutality case against me because he wakes up and he's hurting, and he sees his face in the mirror, and I had a recording going. The one thing I learned from working at is to record all my interactions so I could prove or disprove what whoever was making any allegations, whether it came from the agency or from citizens. And this is my recording. Good evening, sir. May I see your driver's license, your proof of registration, and your insurance? And then you hear him go off the deep end. The lawsuit died the same day he's trying to file it because they can hear my demeanor was professional and his behavior was way out there, right? So that lawsuit didn't go very far. That complaint didn't go very far.
So that was smart. I mean, the recording seems to me to be, before body cams. What gave you the idea? I mean, that's something that was standard that you did at the time?
No. The recording came from, I'm sorry to say it this way, a byproduct of my concern about my agency and how I was being treated, and the negative interactions with the citizens.
Interesting. So later on,
it's a survival thing. Yeah, it's to say, hey, I want you to hear how this interaction went, so you don't have to second guess what it is I said or how I said it.
Yeah, but it was interesting that went along to helping you out with this lawsuit that clearly, instead of having a body cam, you got recording going on, and it kind of proves your side of the story.
So do you remember those 6 other officers that basically we had swam to the same island and we were in survival mode?
Mm-hmm.
And they were seasoned officers. They were doing very well, but they were under scrutiny. Maybe one of them suggested the recording device. Hey, just for your information, maybe wear a recording device and that will help. So there would be no question about what I said or the tone I used.
Interesting. You told me a story about a warehouse that kind of changed a little bit of your thought process and how you were dealing with things instead of being hunted, becoming the hunter.
Yes, because, and you haven't police, but you've been in law enforcement a career, obviously. We work in Boise with backup minutes away, correct? Or you make a stop and they're there automatically. This remote law enforcement agency I worked with did not have backup, right? I just explained that. So you have to have the mindset you're not going to have backup. So if things really go sideways, it's you and whomever you're dealing with. So I get a warehouse call and it's a burglary in progress. And so I was thinking, you don't have backup anymore. Like I was spoiled. I came from an agency that they were there. You didn't even have to ask for them. Well, you weren't going to be able to ask for them because they weren't going to be there in this agency. And I thought, you're going to go in there and this could be an ambush and somebody could be waiting for you. And then I thought, you got to change your mindset. You got to start thinking in terms of you're the hunter and they are the hunted. And the only way this is going to work for your survival, for your mental well-being, is to change how you view policing. So for me, it was the warehouse call. It wasn't the guy laced on PCP because I thought he was just some standard drunk driver. It was the warehouse call that made me realize if you're going to be effective in this line of work, you need to change your mindset. You need to be the hunter. And I don't hunt. I don't kill animals. I don't even eat animals, right? You got to start thinking in terms of, I've got to be the alpha here. And I'm not going in there thinking that somebody's going to kill me. I got to go in there expecting that I got to bring this, whatever's going on, into some form of control. And if it's chaotic, bringing it into control. Like we have had a lot of officer-involved shootings. We've been assigned those investigations, making sense of chaos and bringing stability to chaos. It's a mindset. It really isn't. It wasn't a tactic taught at post. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I didn't learn this at refresher training or remedial training. It has to be your mindset, or you're not going to survive in this line of work.
Yeah.
Like I probably, like you, because I've known you a long time. We all of us that have spent time in this line of work, develop a unique sense of humor. Some people appreciate it and some don't, right?
That is very true. So, Vickie, in 1988, you start with Department of Law Enforcement for Idaho.
98.
Not 98, sorry, 98. That eventually, I don't know, you guys merge or whatever else, but ultimately you start working for Idaho State Police.
Yes.
What are you working on? What you're not, because we talked about this before, you didn't go to patrol with ISP. You're immediately working investigations as a detective. So what are you working on in 1998?
So when initially, before we merged, most of us were doing narcotics like you.
Okay.
Most of us doing narcotics. But I wanted to do homicides and persons crimes. And we didn't have that unit.
Why?
I wanted to understand the psychology about why people hurt other people.
Okay.
So when I was running a fraud unit out of Nevada for 4 years, actually out of Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Sorry, out of Wyoming. 4 years running a fraud unit. I was really not stimulated. I'm like, the premise for fraud is greed, and I'm really tired of it. These people just want free money or more money.
Yeah.
For free.
Yeah.
And so I told my husband, we're going to be leaving Wyoming to go back to Idaho. There's this job opportunity. I think I could work my way into working major crimes. And he didn't want to leave Wyoming. He didn't want to leave Jackson Hole. Nobody wants to leave Jackson Hole, right? I said, this is it's understimulating. It's going to kill me. I can't do this for 20 years. So I applied in 97 didn't get it the first time and reapplied and got it the second time. And in doing so, when I came here, I told the unit, hey, I really want to work major crimes. Well, only a select few were working it, but most of us were working narcotics. So the first year I got to work narcotics, and I wasn't really like, this is doing anything for me, because I had done it for years in Nevada. I worked in the narcotics unit in Nevada. I wanted to work persons crimes. So fortunate for me, Red, his name is Steve Hopkins, he was a major crimes detective and he worked homicides. So we get a homicide in 99, a 19-year-old kid gets killed by a 22-year-old kid, and they decide they're going to give it to me, even though I was assigned to a narcotics team. So Red, Steve Hopkins, becomes my trainee or trainer for this homicide. And I knew that once that first one that I wasn't done, that I wanted to do more of that. So in 99, they let me transition, even though we really didn't have a committed major crimes team. We were starting in that direction, but we really didn't have a committed one. Most of us were still having to work narcotics because that was our mandate. I started working narcotics in 99, never looked back. Our homicides, left the narcotics unit, never worked narcotics again, and just started working major crimes. So it evolved. It eventually evolved because we're the secondary agency to homicides, if you think about this. It's going to be the state or the local in this county, right?
Right.
Well, we were getting enough of them. They allowed me to do it, to go to get the training, to go to the body farm eventually. But in the process, in between the homicides, I developed a skill set working persons crimes and specifically sex crimes. And that's just really wasn't because I was a female. It's because they said, there's other cases that are going to come in, not just homicides. Are you receptive to them? And unfortunately, most of them end up being sex crimes, right? I do work fraud cases. I work white collar because I ran a fraud unit for 4 years. I always say it's really healthy for someone like me to be able to swim from the sex crimes caseload to the fraud caseload, swim to that island and work on just paper cases for a while because it puts it into perspective. I get a break from the sex crimes. Those people, I feel bad for agencies that when they relegate their members to just doing sex crimes, that's all they get to work, that the wear and tear of those types of cases on your psyche is sometimes difficult.
What would you say that your specialty has been then here at ISP? What are you predominantly, once you stopped working narcotics, what was your thing that you like to work on?
The major crimes. The homicides, I have a cold caseload. The sex crimes, because I care about the victims. So victims crimes. We don't do burglaries, which you know that here. We don't do burglaries or property crimes here. So the crimes where people are really impacted the most, which are the homicides and the sex crimes.
How did you learn how to investigate homicides? On-the-job training. You talked about training. Did you get sent somewhere? And you keep referring to the body farm. What is that?
So that's funny because your world, you don't have the body farm, right? The body farm really is the pinnacle for those of us doing homicides. It's at the University of Tennessee. And people donate their bodies to the basically the furtherance of science and how science helps homicide detectives like myself solve crimes where we have decomposition of bodies in varying states of decomp, about how long they've been there, how did they get there, what are the effects of that, of those environments. So in 2005, my sergeant at the time, because I had been training someone that had been difficult the previous year, rewarded me by sending me to the body farm. And the body farm really is to train law enforcement and now death investigators for coroner's offices, the varying states of decomp to understand, and also finding skeletal remains to put a who or give them a name. So over time, when decomp occurs, you lose the opportunity to figure out the physical characteristics of the who, but science helps you give you the who. So through DNA, really DNA today, the exposure to the body farm for me, will have to say, even though for me it was a highlight of my career, it married the law enforcement to the science for me. And then from that point forward in 2005, I felt that's been my marching orders, is the science behind solving our crimes.
How was it the first time, I've talked to other homicide detectives, how was the first time seeing a dead body in person? Is it shocking? How was it for you? Because everybody reacts differently. Was it shocking? Was it, oh, hey, part of the job?
Yeah, I would have to say part of the job because you have to, I think this way, and other people do, and some don't.
Mm-hmm.
You can't personalize anything. So I don't ever personalize when I think, because I have kids, right? I have a husband and kids. I never thought when I talked to my first rape victim, oh my God, this could be me or my kids. You're not effective. This isn't about me or my kids. This is about our victims. So I've never personalized anything. The first dead body I ever saw actually was our neighbor growing up. And I was in elementary school, and my mom, for whatever reason, knew she had died of a stroke. She could tell sitting in her front yard in her chair. And my mom told us, don't go to Mrs. Brown's house. And my mom went down there and found her dead. I've seen dead people before I even became a cop.
So it was never an issue of, some other homicide detectives goes, it was a little shocking at first, then you just get used to it, becomes day to day. You never had to go through that. It was just like, hey, I'm just not going to personalize this. This is part of the job.
Well, for survival, probably. And I think you have to think of it this way. With life comes death. So you have to be really, and that's not philosophical, our lives do come to an end and we are going to experience death. So I would rather be effective by not personalizing it and being able to be effective by not saying this is about me, to get an understanding of who did this to them and give some closure to family members.
Interesting.
And so the first dead body wasn't wearing a uniform. Eventually wearing a uniform, I saw many dead bodies in car crashes, many things, right?
Yeah.
my first assignment was, unfortunately, a 19-year-old kid whose parents thought he was in school, and he had skipped school to go to Boise County, and he got shot and killed by a 22-year-old that had come to the party that was really not invited. And the thing that I think where I look back on that was my first homicide, is I remember his parents saying, there's no way it's our son in this remote location because he's in school.
Yeah.
And we had to explain to them, it is your son. We've made positive ID through the people that took him to that party, that took him out of school when he skipped to do it. And it was really hard for me to understand. Number one, the school didn't call him in to say your son's no longer in school, which I know that has changed today. Schools are more aware of attendance for many other reasons. Columbine. Let's talk about Columbine, right? So it was hard for me to see these parents go through that. It wasn't hard for me personally. It's hard for me to see those parents go through that. Their head was wrapped around that their son Neil should still have been in high school at the school. And what is he doing in Boise County? And that you've misidentified Neil, but it was Neil.
Mm. Interesting. Can you look back on your career, Vickie, and did you have any cases that stood out, whether they made an impact on you, whether they were an important case for, general public? Were there any cases that stood out to you? You've been doing this a long time. Anything of interest that you remember?
Well, I think about this. I'm certain many people, I do kids cases, and I just think the ones that are homicide kids cases, you just think, okay, number one, their life was cut short by somebody else's decision, but you think, what could their potential have been? And then conversely, maybe their death spared them from something else. So as harsh as that is, I've been to autopsies of many kids, some of which are homicide victims, some are accidental cases. And you have to think, we get to see age. You and I are older people, right? These kids will never see our ages. So I also think in terms of, is there something that they were spared by not living beyond that day?
Are the kids ones harder to deal with than the others?
No, I just think it's sad that people, I even think people that are in their 20s that lose their lives, what their potential could have been, they'll never achieve, right? I can't say, I feel bad when old people die, so don't get this wrong. But this older man who had been in law enforcement had retired, and he saw the car accident that was about to unfold. He hit the back of a farm implement at a high rate of speed, and the farm implement had no lights on it, and I was sent to his autopsy. He saved his grandson who was in the passenger seat because he saw what was coming, and the older gentleman broke every single bone in his body when he impacted that farm implement. And all I could think of is, I'm glad he got to see whatever age it was because he was older, right? But he spared the 14-year-old. He's going to have to live with that, the fact his grandpa lost his life. But when they're older, it's not easier, but you can put it into perspective. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
They've had a full life.
So you seem pretty pragmatic about dead bodies in particular. And I've talked to other homicide detectives, and some of them have been affected over what they've seen, and some aren't. Is there a reason why you seem kind of matter of fact about the whole thing? Not that you don't care, because you do, obviously, but is there something that you think growing up, or some sort of mentality that you developed that allows you to just go, hey, look, I'm here to do a job, and I can't think about, the emotional part of it, if that makes sense?
Yeah, but I think, because I've known you a long time and you're the same way, our feelings don't change outcomes. Our actions do, right?
Yeah.
So I spent a year working with victims of domestic violence, and this hit so close to home about why I am the way I am.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't matter what your logic and reasoning are, and you can tell that woman that she shouldn't be with that man because he's not good to her, but her emotions are driving her car, and your logic and reasoning have no seat in that car. So I'm very factual. Logic and reasoning is what drives me, and I try not to let emotions drive me, because when people are highly emotional, there's nothing you can say that's going to change how they feel until they come off of that emotion. So they don't even want you in the car. So I don't believe in bringing emotion in. Oh, that upset me. Well, that has no relevance to getting to the answer of who did this to this person and giving closure to families. So I try not to allow how I feel to influence what I do. I could feel bad. We could feel bad all day long. We'd be at home right now doing origami. But I don't really want to do that. I came back for a reason. People think I came back for, I made a joke of this, okay, just recently. I am married. I've been married going on 29 years. I'm working a cold case DNA genealogy team on the sex crimes and the homicides. I really enjoy it. I want to get an answer. I want to answer the who all these years later that have eluded us. Even from the best of police work, we haven't gotten the answer, right? And I was home one day at 3:00, which is unusual. And I'm making my husband's lunch for his next work day, thinking what should be for dinner. I'm like, why the hell am I doing this? That is just not in my DNA. It is not. Most people look forward to that. My husband can't retire. He still has 9 years of work. There's no point in going home trying to sort out what I should make him for lunch for the next day and dinner that night. It's not in my DNA, so I came back. I already knew I was coming back. It wasn't like I was there and decided to come back. The cards were already lined out that I was coming back on the genealogy team. I'd been on the team for 3 years and we got the grant money. So when I retired, I knew I was transitioning to the granted position under a contract. But I was at home going, I don't know how do they do this? Like they look forward to this, which just wasn't working for me, just so you know.
Over the course of your career, are there types of cases, not specific cases, but other types of cases that you find more rewarding than others to solve or work on?
The ones where science gives you the answer. And just, it's amazing that we could bust our chops, hundreds of hours of police work thinking that we know the answer. And then science comes along and basically humbles you.
Yeah.
So I had a kidnapping rape. This is not, she's allowed me to tell her story and use her name. Her name was Naomi. In 2003, she was taken out of a Walmart in Mountain Home. And over the course of 5 hours, she was raped by 2 suspects in a semi and then left at milepost 13 in Payette County. And when I first went to meet her, and I've had to admit this to her, when I first met her, I said I was not skeptical, but I was guarded about what she was telling me because of her demeanor. And her demeanor was much different than what you would expect somebody that's kidnapped, blindfolded, bound, and then over the course of 5 hours repeatedly raped. You would expect what? Somebody that would be overly emotionally distraught. Well, she was none of those things. So there's the trauma. The trauma brain had kicked in, but we hadn't had that training, right? We had not had it. So I was getting mixed signals on you have to think of it this way objectively. Is this just a story to cover because she had a boyfriend, where she's been for the last 5 hours? Or is there legitimacy? And I was leaning towards legitimacy, but I was also guarded about legitimacy. And so when I asked Naomi, can I ask you, is there any bit of evidence or piece of evidence you could give me that would help us understand and corroborate this? She said, yes. The duct tape that I took off of my hands and my eyes is rolled up in a ball at the exit at milepost 13. So I sent my partner who did our crime scenes to milepost 13, and I was at the hospital with her. And he calls back an hour later and says, the duct tape is here. Changed the whole trajectory, right? But initially, because we didn't have this happen in Idaho. You have to think, in 2003, we weren't having kidnappings and rapes occur. We were having rapes and we were having kidnappings, but we weren't having a combination of the two. It was a different reference point. So that was a game changer for me. So I always tell students this. I just got done teaching this yesterday to our cadets for 8 hours, that you may believe what you're being told. You may have an understanding of what you're being told is not the truth, but you have to believe what they're telling you is true to them, right? Is their belief. Let evidence and statements disprove it. Don't let your judgment disprove it. So with Naomi, she was probably, for me, that defining moment where I had that skepticism. Shame on me. I should never have thought that about Naomi.
Curious about that case where you said you were doing rapes and then there were kidnappings, but it was very uncommon to have rapes and kidnappings.
Not for us, not coming to the state level and not in Idaho at the time.
Okay.
So the science solved hers because I spent hundreds of hours on her case. And it was a semi, and I do know this through this case, that Walmart is trucker friendly. So it started at a Walmart because eventually when we did find the suspects were truck drivers that came out of another state and they knew Walmart was friendly.
That was my question.
Yes. The DNA solved it 7 years later. I'm at work in our lab. I have a really good rapport with our lab gals. I treat them with respect because they do help me solve my cases, but I appreciate their big brains. They came over and they said, we have to tell you, we think we solved one of your cases. Well, I have an unsolved homicide of Dean King who burned to death on the interstate. I thought they were going to tell me they figured out Dean King. And they said, no, we have Naomi's suspect through CODIS. He's an inmate right now in Florida. So we put this together. I flew with my sergeant down to Florida. We got the DNA. The DNA told us who our John Doe 1 and 2 were. They gave them names, at least to John Doe 1, and it ended up being Douglas Dynamore. So we flew to Florida. I flew with Bob Boone, my sergeant at the time. We go down to Florida, and Douglas isn't really wanting to cooperate. He's already in trouble in Florida for other things, so he's really not interested what Idaho detectives want to talk to him about. But at the time that the offense occurred in 2003, kidnapping in Idaho was a capital offense. Mm-hmm. So Douglas, who had been in and out of correctional facilities most of his adult life, he was 27 at the time we met him, was coy enough to ask, well, if it were me, because I've never been to Idaho, I've only been to Iowa. What am I looking at? And I'm thinking, well, we get to play this game. I don't like really good cop, bad cop, but I'm going to play this game. You get the death penalty, Douglas, because you kidnapped her. We have you on the Walmart video taking our victim. Whole demeanor changes, of course, right? And then he doesn't want to talk to us, which we figured. So we leave, and 20 minutes later, Douglas's mom is calling us, and he wants to sing like a little jailbird. He wants to tell us who the primary suspect is, who was his biological father. So he gives up his dad, and this is where I really believe the science and technology really help us. His dad's a truck driver, and he's not in Florida while we're there. And we're there in 2011, in the February 2011. He's not in there. He's on a long-haul trip. So I call our analyst in Idaho. I get his name and what firm he's working for, and I tell our analyst, Karen Montgomery, hey, can you help me find Hans Holsappel? And it's midnight Florida time, 2 a.m. Boise time, and God knows what Connecticut time. She goes, he's in Connecticut in real time in a logbook violation lockdown at a port of entry in a location in Connecticut. I go, my God, Karen, how do you know that? Because she's on the computer and has access to a database, the technology. She goes, but Vickie, you're running out of time. His logbook violation lifts at 6 a.m. So I'm on the phone with the prosecutor trying to convince her to give us a warrant for Hans. And she's like, I don't know. And I'm like, oh my God, be assertive like me. Just do it. So she issues the warrant, and we call Connecticut State Police. And the beauty of policing is you never have to explain yourself but once. When I called the Connecticut State Police, I was in Florida. I said, listen, you have a kidnapping rapist in a semi-truck in a port of entry locked down for the next 2 hours. If you don't get to him, they go, ma'am, we'll go sit on him for you till you get your warrant. You don't have to tell them twice. They knew, we wouldn't be calling him in the middle of the night if this was a farce.
Yeah.
So we get the warrant, and when they knock on the cab door, and Hans Holsappel opens up his semi-cab door, his sleeper portion, he said, this is about what happened in Idaho, isn't it?
Really?
What kind of confession? What better confession could you get?
Wow.
So it works. I mean, when it works, that's the moments where you're like the total buy-in. We've had many failures, right? We've all had failures. Yeah. There's been failures, failing to protect the kids we should have been protecting, and end up being homicide victims, right? Mm-hmm. You and I can't change that. Yeah. I mean, we can't change that trajectory because those kids didn't die in our care. They died in the care of someone else. So when I say, why do we come back? Why have I come back after 43 years? Because I'm not done. And some people, this isn't what defines me. I have a husband, I have kids, I have activities outside of work that I do that I care about, that I have a lot of passion for, but I still like what we do, and I still think we make a difference.
So let's talk about that a little bit, because I know at least one of your children. How is it being a mom in law enforcement, but in particular working on these type of cases? Does it give you trepidation? Does it make you more cautious around your kids? How do you handle that as a mom?
Well, I think in law enforcement, we're that way anyways. So yeah. I don't think that my caseload influences that as much as our profession does. And so my daughter was up at U of I when those 4 murders occurred. Mm-hmm. And so I was on the phone with her constantly. I just put her on the plane. I just turned 60 when that happened. She came down here for my birthday, put her on the plane back to go to Moscow. And she said, hey, 1 student at first was the first report, and then 4 students. So of course, logically, you're thinking carbon monoxide, you're thinking drug overdose, and then you find the truth, right? So the reality is I had to give her the discretion of what she wanted to do because she's an adult. I said, do you want to stay? And she goes, for now, because she was in the ROTC program and they were having those kids stay. Well, as things developed and our agency became involved, in the end, I said, no, I'm not comfortable because they haven't identified a suspect and he or she could be hiding in plain sight. You need to come home.
And just for the audience information, this is the Kohlberger case.
Yes.
Okay.
So I at first was like, you have to make your decisions whether you stay or not. I'm not naive. We sent our kids to school with firearms. So they know how to use them. They've been trained to use them. So I knew that she could protect herself. So I'm being honest here. Most parents do that, right?
Yeah.
If we're doing a policy violation because it's the dorm rooms, then a lot of kids were going to be coming home that weekend. I guarantee you, right? Because I wasn't sending my kid back unarmed. But I didn't send her on that event armed. I sent her back with a gun on an event that occurred a couple months prior to that, a man on the Greenbelt where she used to run with a knife. And I'm like, well, maybe we should send you to school with your gun. So we did. So I had to let her make the decision initially, but ultimately, after we started gathering information, the law enforcement side of us, right, that this guy could be hiding in plain sight. We don't know anything about him. And it could be somebody on that campus that's still walking about and is not done. So I said, you're really going to need to come home. So at that point, I wasn't scared because I knew she was in a group. They stayed in a group. They were clustered together. They were aware, right? Unfortunately, our 4 victims weren't aware and tragically lost their lives. These kids were all aware of what just happened, right? So they're on their guard. So we brought him home. To say I was scared, I have to say I wasn't scared. I was concerned, but I wasn't scared. I knew that she still had control and we had control and we could get her home to a safe environment.
Do you think if I asked any of your kids about growing up with a mom that's in law enforcement, that they would say that they're more street savvy, aware than somebody else that doesn't have a parent that's in law enforcement?
Oh yeah, both my kids, because I have a son, a 26-year-old son. He would tell you this, and your kids would say the same. My kids were never allowed to go to a house where I didn't know the parents. And I don't mean their DNA profile, but I needed to know your name. What do you do for a living? I needed to know something about you. But also, my kids never went to a house where there were guns in the house and that I wasn't aware of where those guns were and how they were kept. And then my kids were the designated drivers.
Yeah.
And as ironic as this is, so my son got a DUI last year. As ironic as this is, I wanted my kids to be in control of that car because in high school, I did lose classmates to drunk driving, and they were drunk when they died. So I knew that it's somebody else, and I had a friend that died at somebody else's hands because they were drunk and driving. So I told my kids, you'll always be the designated driver. Wherever that you want to take your friends, I'll pay for the gas. You will never be in the car with someone else who's under the influence and driving. And that came from a high school event, an incident.
Okay.
Made me aware that somebody else in control killed a classmate. Both of them died, but it made me very aware.
Vickie, do you feel like as a female, you look back on your career, did you feel like you ever had to prove yourself to the other male officers?
I won't say as a female. When I first came here in the 98, I felt that the reception to my hiring was a little hostile, and it really had to do with what I told you before the recording started, that I had filed a complaint with the EEOC and the Human Rights Commission. Mm-hmm. And when I got hired, one of the members of the unit I got hired into, his brother worked for me, and they communicated with each other that I had filed a lawsuit. So I think that they were concerned that I was like lawsuit oriented and was that type of person. So when I came into the unit for the first year, I found that a lot of them were very standoffish. So I couldn't quite get a read as to why. I didn't know why, because this thing happened in the 80s. 20 years later, I'm coming to work for this agency. Like these people were kids when I was policing, right? Some of them were wearing diapers, sucking a binky. So I'm like, well, my past has nothing to do with my present. For me, it does, but not for them. Yeah. Right? Doesn't for me, it definitely does. And so later on, I got to the truth of it, and I thought, well, because of that not going to Berkeley mentality, like nobody's ever going to tell me I'm not going to Berkeley. I'm like, nobody's going to define who I am or what I do or how I do it. And it was a game changer. So I went in the office and basically to clear the record said, hey, I've heard that there's this issue. There was this suggestion I had had sex with one of the sergeants because they told him I had, and I hadn't. And I learned that a year later. So I went in and said, hey, unlike Bill Clinton, I did not have sex with that man, because Bill Clinton, that whole story was prevalent. I did not have sex with that man. And just to clear the air, I never sued the. And all of a sudden, people were talking to me. They had this false impression of who I was because of what they had been told, right, and not who I was. So I wish I had learned it a year before because I could have cleared it sooner. Yeah. But I just noticed this animosity. Part of the animosity was one of the sergeants, before I got hired, said when I was up at one of the conferences in 93, he and I had had sex. So they were mad at me because I had had sex with him. Well, that hadn't happened, but I didn't know that.
Yeah.
So when I went in, he couldn't defend that because I said, hey, unlike Bill Clinton, who did have sex with Monica Lewinsky, I have not had sex with that man. So I treated it lightheartedly. I think that was the buy-in. I didn't go in bitchy. I went in lighthearted. And I said, and also to clear the air, when I was policing with, you have no idea what I went through because some of you were still wearing diapers and binkies. You were kids. You were babies. I started my career long in advance, 18 years before most of you started yours. So I said, you can't define me by what you don't know.
Right.
Clear the air. But I think really you and I know this. If I went in with a hammer, they wouldn't have talked to me. But I went in, I knew my personality is let's make light of it to get through whatever it is we need to get through. There's no point in being mad about it. I don't harbor ill feelings. I do not let my past define the negative aspects of my past define who I am. And that's kept me sane. I still meet people that are still angry about their careers, that have retired. They're angry about how they were treated. And I'm like, I don't want to spend my life angry over things, some of which, I own and some of which I had no control.
How about your perspective on how your views on people have changed over the time that you've been in law enforcement?
I still have my compassion.
So you don't think being in law enforcement has kind of changed your attitude at all? I mean, everybody's different. I'm just asking.
No, when you say that, I'm thinking, okay, I do remember this story. This is a funny story because we were raised very conservatively. When you ask my upbringing, this is how conservative we were. I remember Playboy magazine on the counter in the store with the cover on it, right?
Mm-hmm.
I never saw Playboy in my house. Ever did I? Never heard my parents swear. I accidentally caught my dad swearing when he was typing a report in the basement of our house when we moved here, but my parents never swore. We went to church every Sunday. I swore like a sailor because I had siblings that were teens, and they taught me every swear word I didn't know. My twin and I are on our bicycles, and we're riding by the neighbor's house, and he is a Pan American pilot, but he's retired Air Force. And he has 3 kids we go to school with. We're not real close to his kids, but they're our age, and we go to school with them, elementary school. And he knocks on the window, and he's masturbating. Now, we have no idea what he's doing. This is 1971. My twin and I, 72. We don't know what he's doing. We don't have a reference point, right? So my twin and I say, Mr. Roulette is having an off day. I don't know. But I guarantee you this, looking back now, when I went into policing, I didn't have a reference point like that, right?
Right.
Mr. Roulette today, if we had told the neighbors, would have burned his house to the ground. Do you know what my dad would have said in 70 or 71 about Mr. Roulette? Don't ride your bikes by Mr. Roulette's house. He never would have called the police. He would say, stay away from Mr. Roulette's house. I'm just telling you, right? Think about the parenting of the 70s.
Right.
They wouldn't have called the police today. Have you ever seen Shrek?
Yeah.
The villagers would have been with pitchforks and fire and burned Mr. Roulette out of his house, right?
Yeah.
He's masturbating to 9-year-old kids on their bicycles.
Yeah.
So then I look at it too. His kids were probably victims. Now, I have compassion. I'm thinking his kids were probably his victims. If he's bold enough to masturbate in front of the neighbor girls, what's going on with his kids?
Yeah.
So compassion, if anything. I do want to tell you, when I first started, I thought, oh, we have the death penalty and we should utilize it more often. And then I see the human side of it, and I've kind of softened about that. There are some that warrant absolutely we should put them to death.
Yeah.
And I struggle with that now. And before I wasn't. And now I am struggling with the death penalty and whether or not we really as a state should be killing people.
Yeah, that's an interesting.
But I started out hardcore. We should
Yeah.
put them all to death. And now I can't say I'm that person.
Yeah.
But I am compassionate. But I don't go home and lose sleep over it. If I'm losing sleep, it's because one of my elderly dogs is trying to leave this plane and I'm trying to prevent it.
But I guess the reason why I asked you that initial question is I don't get that. Well, I ask everybody that question. It's kind of some of my ending questions. But I don't get the impression from you that law enforcement has changed you very much as a person in terms of how you see people. You seem very pragmatic about dealing with everybody. I know you as a mom as well. So just thought I'd ask because I don't see law enforcement as changing you very much.
No, I can't say. We all have jokes, right?
Yeah.
There are certain categories of offenders that I think how we should treat them. So some of them obviously do sex offenses, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm not yet convinced that we have a cure. So when we talk about, like, I deal with victims that get a life sentence by somebody else's decision to have sex with them.
Yeah.
They live with that the rest of their lives, and there's nothing that you can do that takes that away. And I know that they've really come a long way with counseling, but the bottom line is they wouldn't need counseling if these events had not happened to them. So I look at sex offenders differently. I'm not convinced that we have a treatment modality that actually keeps us all still safe when they're out and about. So I'm not convinced of that just yet.
Yeah.
And I don't know that I ever will be. So there's a high recidivism rate for people that hurt themselves by drugs and alcohol. But second to that, you have to think we have a high incidence of people that are having sex with people they shouldn't be, and that impact it has on those victims.
Yeah.
You know, when you're abusing drugs or alcohol, you're hurting yourself and your families, right? But when you're having sex with people that don't want to have sex with you, that is a life sentence that never goes away. And I still have probably that side of me that says we don't have a treatment modality where I feel these people should be out and about walking freely that keeps us still safe or our victims safe.
Okay, 2 last questions for you. What would you say to somebody that's interested in going into law enforcement, and does that advice change, or what advice would you give to a female that wants to go into law enforcement?
So it hasn't changed. So I still find it, but I also have, like you did in your career, an agency that's very supportive, that supports me in anything I want to do. I chair the Human Trafficking Task Force here. I asked to do that, and they gave me that opportunity. If you have an agency that's supportive, which yours was, and they give you anything you want, I say go in and do what it is you want to do, and do it well and do it right. But I'm fortunate because not everybody has that in their career. I would say there's no reason you shouldn't come into this profession, but I would give the same advice that my dad gave me. Keep your mouth shut and observe when you first start. And don't give them your opinion, because they really don't. If you think about it, we're a dinosaur. We really don't want your opinion, even though some dinosaurs have gone extinct and we're pumping them in our gas tanks. This institution of policing still believes in, when you're first hired, it's your job to keep your mouth shut and observe and watch your seasoned people. I still believe that's true. That you can't know everything from a textbook. You can't know everything from your social media account that you have. That when you get into the profession, that I would suggest doing it, number one, but also maybe saying less and listening more, because there is a benefit to it. But there are people, they know it all. I've met them. I teach college courses. I have had students question me on how we handled a crime scene of a suicide, that we were wrong, of something that we had already put to rest. A student in a science-based classroom questioned a senior homicide detective that we were wrong. And I'm like, okay, what's your perspective? Number one, what's your experience? And how do you get that perspective? This is a person that really probably needs to be told, you need to really watch what comes out of your mouth and listen more.
So you teach college courses. Have you seen a difference in attitude of the younger generation that's coming up, the people that you're teaching?
Yeah, most do not want to police. Most want to go into the support roles. This is the sad part. In 80, when I started at Boise State University, the majority of us wanted to run and gun, right? That's what we were looking forward to.
Right.
Today, out of the average classroom of 25 to 30, I'm lucky if I have 4. I have classrooms that nobody wants to be a police officer, and I've been teaching 20 years.
What do they want to do if they're taking your classes?
They just want to do supportive things. So the BSU class is a science-based class. It's criminalistics, how we solve crimes using science. That's how we solve them. That's the class. So it's a science-based class. So a lot of those students, not necessarily are they going to be policing students, but I teach policing classes at CWI, and a lot of them don't want to be police officers. They want to do something within the system, but not policing.
Do you think it's the attitude of society toward policing right now? Why do you think they don't want to go into?
Well, George Floyd was the game changer. It was really the game changer. But also, I think their families, because these are younger students at CWI, these are kids where BSU has a higher tuition rate. CWI is financially manageable for most families. They're coming from families, and I do autobiographies with these kids, some of which their members are in prison. 50% of my students have a parent. In all the years I've been teaching there, have a parent that has been impacted by drug use and it is in the system somewhere. A family member or a parent, but a lot of them, they're parents, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that the parents of the students that don't know the other side of the system are concerned about the safety of their children. So their parental influences are telling them not to enter the profession. And they're young enough and they're giving respect to that.
Last question for you. Did being in law enforcement affect your family at all?
Well, if it did, I don't see it. I think it made them safer. But I would say my kids tell me, you were really kind of strict about things. I said, but not for a negative reason, for all the right reasons, right?
Yeah.
So they're like, they saw some of their friends have a little more latitude, but we know outcomes of latitude, giving latitude when when they have developing brains and they're not using good skills, reasoning skills to make the decisions they do. I've seen outcomes of parents giving their kids too much latitude.
But you seem to be a very hard worker, but you have that family life balance where, I talk to a lot of people where they're like, I was working all the time. I loved it, but it took a toll on my family. And it doesn't seem like that was the same case for you.
No, because like you, I'm fortunate enough. We've been in our careers long enough. If I want to go watch a soccer game, my son played collegiate football. I could get my hours in, go to the games. So I went and watched him play football and then come back to work. And if I had to make up the hours, I'm not opposed to coming in on weekends.
Yeah.
So I made my family number one, and this provided that window of opportunity. The other thing I will tell you, the only time that I ever felt like this job got in the way, we were arresting an uncle of a gal. He had been molesting his niece, and it was my daughter's 9th birthday. And I was like, this isn't where I really want to be. I had a problem. I was like, this guy, we could have probably waited. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
The disclosure was made. She was in a safe place. And I was making an arrest at the night my daughter's blowing out her birthday candles on her 9th birthday. And I'm like, I'm not going to let this happen again. Have I worked holidays? Yes. When I worked patrol, I was single. I volunteered to cover married people's patrol shifts so they could be at home with their families. I have no problem doing that. But the only time I ever thought, this is kind of dicked up, is the day that my daughter turned 9 and she's blown out her candles and I couldn't be there because we're arresting the pervert.
Yeah. Yeah.
So no, I when you ask that, I laugh because what cops' kids aren't impacted by their parents' professions?
Right.
Well, they said the 2 hardest kids that come out of environments are preachers or people in religion and people in policing. And I'm going to think there is research supportive of that. There's a reason they targeted those 2 groups, right?
Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
So no, I don't know. I think they're thankful because there's a work ethic too. They saw me go to work and then go to teach, right? They saw me go to work at policing and go to teach at night classes. Both my kids are going to graduate with college degrees with no debt.
Yeah.
And not because we got scholarships, right? But because there's a work ethic and I was willing to support that education because of what my mom instilled in me.
Right. Vickie, thank you for the interview. Appreciate it.
Thank you.